Morning. Thank you very much for joining us this morning to what is the first in a series that we have called Supporting Success. To start with, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jenny Reardon. I'm the head of HR of Gatekeeper HR at Rix & Kay Solicitors, and we provide HR support to a whole number of clients, either on a retainer or ad hoc basis.
I'm Camilla Spaniak. I'm one of the recruitment managers at Gerard White. I've been doing recruitment for 12 years now. Gerard White are based in Tunbridge Wells, but we do UK-based recruitment, well, a little bit of international as well, in lots of different areas and markets.
Hello, I'm Elaine Abbs. I'm an employment solicitor at Rix & Kay.
So the three topics that we are going to be discussing today are employee attraction and retention, salary and pay strategies, and workplace wellbeing. Just in terms of housekeeping, you will have the opportunity, if you have any questions that you would like to ask us, feel free to do so in the chat box. We will leave any answers to the end of the session. But as I say, please feel free as we go through the discussion to pop any questions that you've got in that chat. We are also recording today, so we will ensure that all attendees receive a copy of the recording, and also of a handout. We'll ensure that all the main points that we discussed today are included in that handout. And ideally, if we would very much appreciate it if you could provide us with your feedback. We'll provide a feedback sheet as part of the documents that we send through to you. So yeah, feedback on anything about the discussion, and also any suggestions for future topics that you might have that we can use for future webinars. So, okay, so let's move on to the first section, which is about employee attraction and retention. So I'm sure many of you are aware that from a business perspective, attracting and retaining staff is a key issue for many businesses across the UK. And it's interesting that in 2023, the average tenure of an employee was 4.1 years, with nearly 14% turnover also in 2023. And when you bear in mind that the cost of replacing an employee on average is 25,000, you know, that has quite an impact on any business, small or large. And interestingly enough, in 2024, it is predicted that 1 in 5 employees will leave their current employer. So obviously that retention and recruitment of staff is key. So bearing all that in mind, Cam, in your experience as a professional recruiter, what do you find are the priorities for an employer in relation to recruitment and retaining staff?
Yeah, I think the first thing that's important to do is kind of almost define the difference between recruitment and retention. And recruitment, putting it simply, is attracting people to your business, whereas retention is obviously keeping good people. So I think, you know, there are 3 key points. The first one, obviously, business leaders are always thinking about costs within the business. And as you mentioned, it is expensive to find new people. And that's kind of, it takes into account both people doing it themselves, obviously, you know, having internal recruitment teams, or, you know, being a HR manager and having to do it yourself. And obviously, if you are in your position, HR manager, trying to do it yourself, you're not a professional at doing that. You're an expert at what you do, but, you know, you're also trying to do another job as well. And trying to balance all of that is hard. So, you know, even us in recruitment, we use agencies sometimes to find our people. So I totally appreciate that. With the cost, you need to keep that in mind. But, you know, it's also about your strategy and keeping a really clear mind on that. You know, what is your strategy? Is it about growing your business? Is it about, you know, the kind of growing the people that you've got within the business as well? So new people can obviously introduce new ideas, they can introduce potentially new work, and it's all things like that. And that, you know, is about having the right team. So if you have got the right team, you can think about succession planning, you can think about, you know, the training that everybody needs, and so that kind of links in obviously to the retention side of things. And with that, the important factors that I think, you know, you need to be aware of is making sure that your salary and your benefits are, you know, competitive and where they should be, and so regularly reviewing that. Obviously, as I've said, keeping people happy, we're going to talk a little bit about one-to-ones, so that's really key. But also, fundamentally, if you keep your people, you stop or reduce the amount that you're going to have to backfill. And obviously, as we've said, that links into the cost of that. So I think ultimately what a business leader needs to be thinking about is, yes, there's going to be a cost, but you want to be putting that cost into growing your business as opposed to, having to just tread water, basically, and, replacing your existing staff.
Okay.
So I'm going to flip this to you then. So from like an employee's perspective, what do you think is about, attracting somebody into a new role? Or perhaps I should answer that, I suppose.
That probably is, as a recruiter, it's probably a question more appropriate.
Yeah, sorry. So I think, there is the age-old proverb of, an employee will join a company, but they will leave a manager. And I think, I'm a manager and that hurts, when people leave. So, you need to make sure that, you've got the right people in place in that. But, salaries are massive. You as you mentioned earlier, it's a consideration that salaries have been going up. People are really aware of, the cost of living crisis. And that's why we go to work, really, I suppose. Flexible working, I think, is, a key thing as well. There's been so many people that have been working from home during COVID. And I'm finding that a lot of my clients are now wanting people to come back into the office more. And whether candidates actually want that or not is a different thing, really. But people are definitely looking for, more flexibility. And I think with people coming back into the office as well, it's, about having that culture. It's really lonely working on your own. All of us during COVID were working at home, and lots of people like to have that kind of, open culture, I suppose. Training progression obviously is always a key thing for why people move on as well. If you feel as though you're limited, a bit of a glass ceiling, then, it's about possibly having to move on in order to get that. And then I think diversity and inclusion is a key talking point at the moment. If you're working somewhere where, for example, it's all men or it's all women or all older people, all younger people, then that can, generally be a reason why a lot of people, do move on. But, from obviously I mentioned there about career development, what do you think from kind of like, how can HR support on that?
Okay. So there's lots of things that HR can do in order to facilitate it, but I think initially there needs to be leadership buy-in, and there needs to be an overarching strategy in terms of learning and development. That is key. You need to ensure that you've got robust and transparent processes in place so that people have an opportunity to discuss their development. Now, whether that is through one-to-ones, annual appraisals, quarterly check-ins, there's a whole number of vehicles in which different businesses will use, but I think it's actually having the opportunity to discuss that development or career progression. And I think along with that goes the necessity to train your managers, to make sure that your managers have the skills to undertake some appraisal or quarterly check-in and do that well.
Yeah.
Rather than it just being a piece of paper that gets signed off once a month or once a quarter, making sure that your managers understand the importance and have the skills to be able to deliver that performance review appropriately. I think it's also key to make sure that you create clear and realistic goals when you have those discussions.
Yeah.
Make sure that the employee has signed on to those, so that it's not just a one-way street, that those goals have been reached in agreement. And I think it's also very key to make sure that you clearly communicate career opportunities and promotions. The process of doing that to all your employees. There have been occasions where I've come across employees who don't understand what they need to do in order to take that next step up the ladder. And, you know, it's really the responsibility of the leadership and the managers to ensure that that process is clear.
Yeah.
And you obviously need to ensure that your business needs are aligned with your career opportunities. You know, that there's no point in having an or putting out an opportunity that actually the business doesn't support. So you need to ensure that whatever, which again, why it's really important to make sure you've got an overarching strategy so that that does link back into your business strategy.
Yeah.
And just being aware that whilst we're talking about career development, and lots of people do want development in their career, in terms of progression, but there is also a number of people in your businesses that maybe just want to develop in their current role, and that is equally as important, to make sure that you understand what that the expectation of that employee is, and the things that you can do to improve, develop their skills in their current role, rather than necessarily looking for the next progression.
Yeah.
And I think it's really key, because it is very clear that lack of career development is one of the main reasons that employees will leave.
Yeah.
And there's a recent report where it was determined that companies that prioritise that employee development piece see 24.3% business growth, more so than companies that don't.
Oh wow.
So it is a real key.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Elaine, you know, obviously flexible working, you know, continues to be a thing that I talk to probably 95% of the candidates that I speak to. So, you know, I understand obviously there's change in legislation coming soon.
Yes, in fact next Saturday on April the 6th.
Oh, okay.
I can't believe it's April.
Yeah.
There's a right to request flexible working, make the request, that is, rather than have it, that's coming in from day one, on the 6th of April. And prior to this, most people will probably know that it took 26 weeks of working for your employer before you could actually make the request.
Yeah.
So that's coming in next Saturday, 6th of April. And then later on in the year, everyone will probably hear, if you're interested in this kind of thing, that the rules are going to change even further, and you can make 2 requests a year rather than 1 a year, and you can you can present a case to your employer that the reasons you want it. But the new legislation is going to take away the possibility of an employer requiring you to make a case yourself for why that request would suit the business. So you don't have to say that in a request.
So you don't need to justify.
No, you don't need to justify it. And you know, employers looking at flexible working, the way they approach that has changed hugely since COVID, and most employers will not have that initial resistance by refusing to engage or refusing the request. They'll know that that's, you know, working flexibly obviously can have advantages for businesses as well as employees.
Yeah.
And goes back to the whole retention piece, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you'll know that people actually, before they even go to the interview, are asking you about whether they're going to be able to ask the employer to work flexibly.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
Absolutely. No, fantastic. So that's a really good answer. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next topic. So salary and pay strategies. And you know, I've got some interesting facts for you. So the expected pay for 2024 is going to increase by 3% in public services and public sector, and probably about 4% in the private sector, which is in line roughly with the inflation rate, which at the moment is I think 3.4% or 3.8%. Also, national minimum wage obviously is going to be going up for all ages as well, and it's over 9% in some categories. Yeah, absolutely. So, Jenny, I mean, you know, what do you think an employer should, you know, consider when they're carrying out a salary review?
Okay, so I think it is really important to prepare, to do your research, to understand your market, to have some idea from as to what your competitors are doing in the market. And there's lots of ways in which you can gather that data. There's benchmarking providers. Obviously, you can do your own market research, go online. You know, we've all gone onto the job websites. They don't necessarily all have salary information on them, but it's quite a good source to get a general idea. to use your agency, exactly, which we have done and do. Use your agents. If you do use agencies to recruit, they are a really good source because they're very alive to the marketplace and your competitors and what it is likely you're going to have to pay for a very specific type of job role.
Yeah.
So absolutely do that research is key.
Yeah.
I know, a lot of businesses, especially at the moment, are looking at what they can afford, and that is all about affordability from a business perspective.
Yeah.
Many businesses will just apply an inflation rate across the board. Others will look at personal performance, and again, that's a really good way of doing it. If you've got the ability to do that, look at your previous year's appraisals, look at what that employee is delivering to the business. If you've got financials that you can put into the equation, targets, what how they performed from a financial perspective in any particular year, and use that data, but make sure that you are using it in an objective way, that you're able, if needs be, to justify any decisions that you make as regards awarding one employee somewhat more than another. That is really key. So make sure that if you are going to differentiate between employees, that you're able to very objectively justify those decisions. And I think it's also being mindful of pay gaps. A recent ONS data shows that despite all the work that various businesses apparently are trying to do in order to remove the gender pay gaps, actually it has increased and is now up by 8.3%. So, and it's not just about gender, it's about a whole variety of things, but it is really important when you are looking at your salaries across your business to make sure that you identify the same or similar jobs and look at how people are being paid accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elaine, from like an employment law perspective, are there any specific legislation? Is there any specific legislation that goes along those lines?
There's legislation in regard to pay between men and women.
Yeah.
So that's contained in the Equality Act. It's the equal pay legislation.
Yeah.
And so under that, but men and women who do carry out an equal role, which is considered equal, they are their pay must be equal.
Yeah.
Unless there's a material factor, so that there is a reason that the employer can justify for that difference. And most equal pay claims are incredibly difficult to make, so employers aren't going to be facing huge numbers of them, but it is important for an employer to have a look at their business, look throughout, and just make sure they do an audit to sort of prepare themselves, as everyone is going to make a challenge. And if they in their audit can find anomalies, then they need to try to address those, find a strategy to think about how they can justify it or rectify the situation. So there isn't any law to say that taking away the male-female differential, there isn't any law to say that pay has to be fair.
Yeah.
So it's generally, people do talk about their salaries at work much more nowadays, and so anyone who's going to be dissatisfied and wanting to leave if they find out that their colleague is on vastly a greater salary, and in fact they're carrying out exactly the same role. So look at fairness.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay. So Ooh, I've got this moving. I'll hold it for a second.
Shall I put it down? I think that's the best thing. Yeah,
I would leave it.
Yeah, okay, I just don't want it to fall on top of your head.
I can hold it.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. What advice you'd give candidates that they're, when they're in a negotiation with their employer about their salary? It's difficult. Asking that question.
I think, I speak to candidates throughout their career, whether they're looking for a new role. I also have lots of candidates that, will just ask for advice, really, just like, you would ask us, employees ask us too. So the same kind of applies in that, if you're looking for an increase from your current employer, it's prep. What have you added to that business? What have you, whether that is a financial aspect or also, supporting other members of staff and, as I say, value add, but also making sure that you know, you're on the correct salary. And so, you know, that's through exactly the same channels of finding out what your worth is. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I always say to candidates as well, be prepared that a pay rise might not be immediate. If you ask for it, it might not happen. But if that is the case, fine. But what do I need to do in order to, you know, to get to the next stage, really? And I think as well, it's about considering the bigger picture for a lot of employees. You know, are you going to get greater exposure by staying where you are, or are you going to get better exposure in the long and hit your long-term goal by potentially moving on? But salary isn't always everything. You know, yes, it's an important factor of why we go to work. Of course it is, but it's not everything. So I always say to you know, employees, speak to your employer before. If that is the driving factor that you just want a pay rise, speak to them before. And if you, yeah, exactly. And then if you do get another job, then the biggest piece of advice I always say to people is don't accept a counteroffer. And I think that's important for me to raise from, you know, obviously we've got HR managers that are listening to us at the moment. I don't think necessarily counter offers are the way forward to keep your staff. You should be recognising what they're worth already. And it goes back to all of those points that, you know, we've already covered. You know, but counter offers, yeah, they're not the way forward to get a new get a pay rise at all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Cam. So sort of moving on from that then, as you say, pay is not the only consideration a candidate or a current employee will be looking at when they consider their pay package. So what should employers consider? Employers should not consider actual pay, but look at the remuneration package as a whole. Yeah. So what other benefits, from your experience, are employees keen to see?
Yeah, as you say, it's not all about money. I think a lot of the time people just want recognition, you know. So, for example, like Gerard White, we have a benefit. It's called Perk Box. It gives discounts for shopping all over the place, you know. But a big thing that we really like internally is that you can give kudos to your colleagues. Your managers can give kudos to you know, their team members as well. And we also do a monthly all hands call, which is everybody in the business. You know, if they work remotely, they dial in. If they're in the office, obviously they're present. And it's where we're able to let people know about what's happening within the business. But a big part, again, is that we have a specific section where you can nominate your colleagues for certain things. You know, it generally tends to be around our core values, but you know, just to be able to go, my God, look, you know, Sarah, you did an amazing job on that. Well done.
And that's really key. Lots of businesses, we do that at Ricks and Kay, have kudos, and that's really
awesome. So important. But you know, in terms of the benefits side of things, you know, lots of companies are really looking into it, and I think it is key, because if you are comparing two salaries, for example, you know, two job offers, and they're the same, benefits is going to be a bit of a feature. So, you know, lots of people are really conscious about pension contributions now. You don't have to just have the government standard. You can enhance that if you want. You know, that's a big thing. But also holiday entitlement. You know, so I know you guys at Ricks and Kay have got that you have the ability to buy and sell holiday, and some companies allow you to be able to carry that over as well, which is key. I've known of a candidate who you know, every time negotiates a little bit more holiday, and actually that's more important for her than having a bigger salary sometimes. Flexible working, as we mentioned, is key.
It's a benefit.
Oh, it's a massive benefit, you know, even if it's just that you need to be at home for a delivery, or, you know, I don't know, the boiler's being serviced or whatever. You know, lots of people are really interested in that. And, you know, the chance to be involved in charity days as well, people really like that. And from an employer point of view, you know, corporate responsibility is key. You know, the ability to be able to blast that out on social media as well, you know, is really interesting, and that is great for attracting new staff as well.
And things like that don't necessarily cost a business money.
Yeah,
and that's, you know, if as times are difficult currently, you know, there are other ways, you know, just a simple thank you at the end of the day and an acknowledgement of a good piece of work that somebody's done are all key, that don't necessarily cost the business money.
Absolutely. Or, you know, bonuses, and that can be linked to their performance as well. You know, private medical insurance, dental covered, is it just for you, is it for your family, etc., etc. You know, life insurance in some cases. But what I always say is, obviously, you need to take advice from HMRC, because some of those are going to affect the bottom line, obviously. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I've mentioned a few things there which could come into salary sacrifice. You know, what's your take on that?
Employees are, you know, they do ask about salary sacrifice, and employers have offered this. It's a way of an employer and employee having less the employee has less of their salary that's subject to tax and national insurance, and in return for that they get some kind of benefit, which is not a cash benefit from their employment. So, for example, there's pension, an impact on pension, and the employer, another benefit that they can offer that's not a cash benefit is a cycle to work scheme. Childcare, nursery that's offered on the premises at the workplace is another kind of benefit. And in fact, in 2018, the government reduced the number of salary sacrifice related benefits. So people who previously were able to apply for childcare vouchers, after 2018, they haven't, that system's no longer in existence, but people who applied for it before can continue to have that benefit if they're still working with the same employer. So salary sacrifices are something to look at, and it's something that people ask about.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to move us on to the next topics of workplace wellbeing. So what, you know, Jenny, in what way would you kind of recommend an employer could support an employee's wellbeing?
Okay, well, again, there is a myriad of them, and again, it's really important that the initial step is to ensure that you've got buy-in from your leadership team, and the recognition and appreciation of knowing that having a fit, healthy workforce has a direct impact on their individual performance. I mean, there's a lot of studies out there that clearly demonstrate that if you've got a healthy workforce, your success will you know increase. So how that support, what shape that support takes, as I say, there's a whole plethora of resources. Employee assistance programs are quite a common one now that many companies have adopted. There's lots of providers out there. It's really important when you look at the provider that you research and make sure that it's the right fit for your employee group.
So in an assistance program, Jenny, can you get counselling?
Very many of them do have counselling, some don't, but the majority do have counselling, and they'll cover anything from, you know, sort of family matters to financial matters. There's you know, most of them will provide some guidance, counselling, or even signposting in some instances to the relevant resource. So, as I say, it's a relatively low cost, but very often well used resource to have an employee assistance program. Ensuring that, as we've already discussed, you've got some form of flexible, agile, hybrid working in place, because there's lots of people out there who have got carer responsibilities or are parents, and you know, really value that level of flexibility from their employer, and that in itself has an impact on their general well-being. Making sure that the work environment and the job design is right for everybody. You can have health and wellness programs, and again, there's lots of, you know, from yoga to meditation to all sorts of things. You know, there is a provider that provides most everything these days.
One of my clients actually had yoga teachers come in at lunchtime, and then they had chefs coming in and teaching them how to, you know, cook things at lunchtime as well. Yeah, it's really interesting.
It all adds to that sense of well-being, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so sometimes people require their counselling appointments within the work time. So it's kind of a new thing that actually employers are considering, allowing people time off from work to actually within the working hours to go for an appointment. And that's really helpful.
I mean, at the end of the day, what any employer is looking for is a fit, healthy employee who attends the workplace, and all those sorts of things will have an impact. So it is really important to consider your sort of wellbeing strategy within your business and what you want to include.
And training managers.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly training managers, making sure that you've got an open door policy and clear communication, that all your policies and procedures with regards to wellbeing are well communicated. And it's really important to have well-trained managers. I know it's often called soft skills, and I understand why it's called soft skills, but actually I always say to managers that managing staff is probably the hardest aspect of their role.
Absolutely.
And it's ensuring that as leaders of the business, that you've trained your managers to have that level of soft skill that they need in order to manage their teams. And that is key. And also ensuring that when you do we talked about one-to-ones, appraisals, quarter reviews previously, but not when you go into those, not just having a discussion about how somebody is performing, but actually how are they doing? You know, is there anything you can help with? Is there anything that you should be aware of that maybe they've not had an opportunity to speak to you about? So it's about knowing your employees so that you can then respond appropriately. And also engaging with staff. Making sure that if you do put a program together for general well-being within your workplace, that you've got some feedback mechanisms so that they can tell you, actually, this is being well utilised and this isn't. I mean, a lot of these providers are EAP providers, you know, although they won't give you confidential information, they'll give you stats on usage, and that's key to see whether or not it is being well utilised. And if it isn't, then maybe you need to talk to staff about what they might feel that is more beneficial for them.
Well, there's no point paying for something if it's not being used, does it? It's completely waste.
But as I say, all of the things that I've just mentioned do contribute to people's positive mental health and general well-being, and therefore that has an impact on your bottom line as a business. It is a key consideration.
And I think managed boards of companies are actually they're having this on their agendas. And so if they are seen, if the board is seen to be in touch about things like this and rather more emotionally intelligent than historically company boards would be, from that buy-in, that encourages people to feel more open about asking for wellbeing support.
Absolutely.
It's ingrained.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so Cam, are you finding any new trends in terms of what a candidate is looking for when they're considering an employer in terms of sort of wellbeing initiatives? Is there anything specific?
I think, mental health is a massive, massive topic at the moment. Everybody is is aware and becoming more aware, which I think is great, and we need to talk about mental health. So, I think it can impact somebody's decision, but I think it's more, for example, like as you said, a lot of firms have got EAP, and that's great, but you need to do your research on them because some are better than others, but also flexibility. So one of my friends recently, she posted on Facebook that her company is allowing, they call it a green hour. So you've got your lunch hour, but they're also allowed an extra hour a week to go and do something green. So for her, she's a horse rider, she was out for a hack on her horse, and I was just like, that's great. And I think it's appreciating that we are people, we're not machines, and therefore there are other elements that kind of motivate us and can keep us switched on at work, and therefore when you are at work, you're using your time to the full capacity, really.
So it's creative thinking, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Loads of people have got fruit in the office to just kind of get people to start thinking a bit healthier, but obviously there's a lot of businesses that are wanting to encourage their staff back in. So Gerard, we've got a snack box where everybody,
We haven't
you
got
know,
one of those, Jen.
no, you need to get on that. But you know, it's a nice kind of small reward, you know.
Yeah.
Wellness days is
Mm.
something as well to consider. But you know, I don't think any of these are individually going to make
Maybe more about the
something.
culture of that employer.
Absolutely, you know, and just giving that impression, well, not so much just giving the impression, but actually doing it, you know,
Yeah.
and caring about your
Honouring it.
people, you know, understanding that, as I say, you're not just a machine, you're a person. And so part of that is, you know, the supportiveness of an organisation, and like you said, understanding your staff, what makes them tick outside of work,
Yeah.
you know, and what are those impacts going to have, childcare and, you know, ill parents or whatever, really. Yeah.
Okay.
So Elaine, you know, again, new legislation that's going to be coming in. And I mentioned there about caring. What's
Yeah.
going on with carers leave? in
Just
April?
that there is a right coming in again on April the 6th, which has been discussed for many months. So finally it's coming in, and each employee can have a week, 7 days
Okay.
per year, that they can take time off work to care for someone who's a dependent.
Okay.
And they don't have to prove that person is dependent. They simply talk to their employer and make a
Okay.
request. As a formal way of making the request.
Yeah.
Usefully, you can take the days off as 1 day a week or half day a week. You
Okay.
can't take it in chunks of less than a half day.
Yeah.
But and you don't have to take the days together. So that, you know, over a year, there's an ability to have that number of days.
Yeah.
And it is unpaid.
And it is unpaid.
Yeah. Do you have to kind of prove? Sorry.
No, you don't have to prove that you're caring for someone.
Okay.
No.
It's interesting.
But we're near the end of the talk, I think, aren't we?
Yeah.
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 Okay, so thank you very much for listening. Do we have any questions before we conclude?
We're just being passed over some
Yeah.
questions.
Okay,
So,
so first question is the process for making the request for flexible working the same as it always has been?
Elaine, excuse me. Yes, it actually is. There's nothing that's changing. It's just you can. Most employers have got a flexible working policy, and under that policy, there's a formal form that people can fill in, or equally, you can send an email to your employer, and you can request it that way. The procedure is much less complicated than it was when initially the request for flexible working came in, and employers have to just deal with these things reasonably. So as soon as the manager receives that request, they should refer to their policy and go forward like that.
excellent. I think this will be a question for me. What do you think are the 3 key things a company can do to attract new staff? I think the biggest thing is your kind of shop window. And when I say that, I'm talking about like the website, because you can give so much away about the culture that you've got, the benefits that you've got, you know, obviously trying to attract people directly. It cuts us out, but you know, we'll reduce the spend on that. But also, you know, on the flip side of that, partnering with an agency for all of the reasons that we mentioned. Number 3, I would say definitely your perception within the market. You know, I think people are so aware now, and there's so much information out there on the internet, like Glassdoor, for example. Loads of candidates are using that now.
What's Glassdoor?
So Glassdoor is where the employees of the company will give feedback.
Okay.
So it's unbiased. Obviously, you know, you've got client reviews, obviously, on Trustpilot and everything else, but Glassdoor is employee specific. But I'm going to add a 4th thing in there. I'm going to be a bit cheeky. Communication, you know, communication from the business. There is nothing more off-putting for a candidate than applying for a role and not hearing anything back. Or I've had candidates in the past that specifically, and I've written a blog about this actually, specifically accepting a role over another one because the employer made the offer really, really quickly and acted swiftly, and they thought, that's great, because it's obviously kind of decision making.
And I think that's especially key when many businesses, there is a shortage of skilled staff.
Oh, big time.
There are more vacancies out there than there are quality candidates, and therefore actually make, if you see somebody you think they're right for the job,
move
quickly.
Yeah. Don't delay at all.
delay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so who's this question for? How often do you think that line managers should have a well-being type check-in with their employees? Is monthly enough, do you think? Shall I take this on?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules. I think that it's important that you know your staff well, and therefore you know how regularly those check-ins should happen. For some people it might be weekly, for others it might be monthly, others it might be quarterly. There is no hard and fast rules. It's just being aware enough about your team, so that if you are noticing anything different, or you feel somebody's maybe not behaving in the same way they would normally, give them the opportunity to have a chat. But
and be careful not to be oppressive about it.
Exactly.
So some people can feel, okay, I'm having too many check-ins. What's wrong?
Yeah.
So it needs to be well-being.
Yeah. But again, ask the employee. If you're having a discussion about things generally, say to them, what would suit you? What best suits you? I'd like to do it every month. Is that going to be too much or not enough? And then you can agree
being cared about, isn't it? So
it's been feeling valued and part of your team.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, is that it? Yes,
fantastic. So I'm going to thank you all so much for attending. Thank you guys for taking the time to speak to me. So as Jenny said, we're going to be sending out a recording and a handout to you guys, and there are going to be further webinars. They're probably going to be every quarter, but a date is going to be confirmed, and like you said, we would really welcome any suggestions on topics that maybe you'd like to see, and so you'll see that there's a bit on the feedback form that you'll have on that. So if you could do that, that would be amazing.
And we'll attempt not to have a scenery malfunction. I think I've brought it out. Malfunction regularly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.